Hi, I'm Marin. My sister drove off with her friends and left me in a town I'd never been to, with no money, no ID, no way home. She rolled down the window, smiled, and said, "Figure it out." That was the moment I realized. It hadn't started there. It started long before, with the silences, the side comments, the way my family always looked past me like I was optional. They erased me from photos, lied to protect her reputation, told me not to make this a thing. But when your own blood decides you're disposable, how do you even begin to rebuild? And why did it take losing everything for me to finally be heard? When Kalista invited me on that trip, I wanted to believe it was her way of making peace. She used words like reset and reconnect, sprinkling phrases like sisterhood healing into her texts. I remember staring at my phone in the middle of a Tuesday work shift, covered in a fine coat of attic insulation, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this was her trying to turn a new leaf. I wanted to believe her, not because she'd given me reason to, but because I was tired of being the one who always said no. So I said yes. We met in Sedona, Arizona, a place she claimed had spiritual energy, which, in Kalista speak, meant the hotels were expensive and the rocks made for good Instagram backgrounds. She arrived in a champagne-colored SUV, the kind I could never afford, her sunglasses oversized, her mouth ready with a rehearsed smile. 3 of her friends spilled out behind her, tan, blonde, all with the same breezy laugh that made you feel like the punchline, even if you hadn't heard the joke. "Ladies, this is Marin," Kalista announced like she was unveiling a new line of handbags. "She works with, like, HVAC stuff, right?" I gave a small wave. "Heating and cooling," I corrected. One of the women, Lissa, I think, tilted her head. "Wow, that sounds intense." Kalista linked arms with me and whispered just loud enough, "She's very hands-on, like crawl in your attic kind of hands-on." They laughed. I smiled. Because what else could I do? At brunch, they gave me the chair closest to the kitchen door. Every time a server walked past, I caught a gust of fryer oil in someone else's conversation. Kalista ordered for the table without asking. When the mimosa pitcher arrived, she raised her glass and toasted to growth, grace, and letting go of old stories. She didn't look at me, but everyone else did. That afternoon, we wandered through boutiques, the kind that sold scented candles with spiritual affirmations and ceramic bowls for $140. Kalista walked ahead, narrating her life updates for the benefit of her friends. I trailed behind, carrying her tote bag because she said it didn't match her outfit. As the sun dipped lower, I asked if we could head back to the rental. I was starting to feel dizzy from the heat and all the smiling. Kalista's face tightened. "Oh, come on, Mar," she said. "Don't kill the vibe." "I'm just tired," I said. "It's been a long day." She turned to her friends, who were busy pretending not to listen. "She's always like this," she told them. "Can't handle anything that doesn't come with a thermostat." The laughter was quieter this time. I stepped away, trying to breathe. A few minutes later, Kalista caught up with me near a small side street where the SUV was parked. "Look," she said, her voice syrupy, "why don't you wait here for a sec? I need to talk to the girls real quick." "Okay," I said, adjusting the bag on my shoulder. I stood there. 10 minutes. 15. Then the engine started. Kalista pulled up alongside me. Her sunglasses were back on. "You'll be fine," she said, like it was a blessing. "Figure it out, Mar!" Then the car door slammed shut. The SUV rolled away, tires crunching over gravel, and they were gone. At first, I didn't move. I was still holding her tote bag. The weight of it felt stupid in my hand. I told myself it was a joke. She'd circle back. She'd laugh and say, "Gotcha." But the minutes kept dragging on. The road stayed empty. Finally, I sat on the curb, pulled out my phone, and tried calling her. Blocked. I tried another number, Lissa's, straight to voicemail. Then I reached into my bag. My wallet was gone. No ID, no credit card, not even the 20 I'd tucked into the side pocket. I checked the bag again, heart racing. Everything was rearranged, just enough to make it look like nothing was missing unless you were me. It wasn't a prank. It was a setup. I felt a rush of heat creep up my neck. My hands shook as I looked around, trying to appear unfazed, like I belonged here. like I wasn't some discarded sister left behind in designer sandals on a dusty sidewalk. Across the street was a general store. I walked inside, heart pounding, and asked the cashier, an older man with a name tag that said Pete, if I could use their phone. He looked at me like he'd seen this before. "Cell died?" he asked, not unkindly. I nodded. He handed me a landline phone with the kind of cord I hadn't seen since high school. I tried my parents' number. My mom didn't answer. My dad's line rang once, then dropped. I returned the phone, thanked Pete, and walked outside again. The street looked different now, less charming, more hollow. I sat down on a bench near a pottery shop and stared at the sky as it turned that coppery pink that usually makes people take out their phones for sunset shots. I didn't take a picture. I didn't want to remember this. For a while, I just sat there, trying to think. I could lie and say my sister was coming back, that I was just waiting, but that wouldn't help me eat or sleep or get home. I opened my coat pocket, half hoping for something, anything, and found a folded $20 bill. Emergency cash. I'd forgotten I even had it. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I asked Pete if there was a place nearby that rented cheap rooms. He pointed me 2 blocks down to a low-slung motel that looked like it hadn't seen fresh paint since the early 90s. I checked in. The clerk didn't ask questions. I paid cash. Room 6. The key was still metal. The room smelled like old cologne and lemon cleaner. The bedspread was too colorful. The air conditioner rattled, but the lock worked, and the door closed behind me like a small kind of mercy. I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the carpet, wondering when it all started to unravel. Not today, not even on this trip, long before. But today was the day I stopped pretending it could ever be fixed. I woke up to the distant hum of a vending machine outside the motel room window and the scratchy feel of polyester sheets stuck to my skin. For a second, I didn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The sidewalk, the laughter. Figure it out, Mar. The joke wasn't funny anymore. Not when your wallet's missing, your phone's dying, and your sister's nowhere in sight. Not when you're lying in a borrowed bed in a room that smells like bleach and rust. I sat up slowly, every muscle stiff from a night of shallow sleep. My phone was on the floor where I'd dropped it, screen face down. I picked it up, the screen lit up with a red warning, 10% battery left. I swiped through my call log. Still blocked. It had been almost 15 hours since she left me there. I stared at the ceiling for a while, letting the silence grow thick around me. There wasn't even a TV in the room, just an old lamp with a yellow shade and a small table covered in outdated brochures for Jeep tours and vortex hikes. Maybe she thought I'd call home and they'd come running. Maybe I still thought that too. I pressed the dial button, not even knowing what I wanted out of it. Maybe to be heard, maybe to be rescued, maybe just to know that I wasn't invisible to the people who claimed to love me. It rang, then again, and then, "Hello?" My mother's voice, just as familiar as I remembered, sharp as ever. "Mom?" I said, sitting up straighter. "It's me." Silence. "Where are you?" she asked, not in concern but confusion. "Kalista left me. I don't know why. I don't know where she went." "What did you do this time, Marin?" That landed like a slap. I didn't do anything. We were just walking, and she said something about me ruining the mood, and then she got in the car and left. I thought it was a joke. My mother sighed. "You always make things dramatic. Maybe you just need to learn when not to push people." I blinked. "She took my wallet." "I'm sure it was a misunderstanding. She blocked me, Mom. She probably just needs some space." I could barely form words. "You're not even going to ask if I'm safe? Of course I hope you're safe," she snapped. "But Marin, you have a tendency to make everything about you. Maybe it's time you take a look at your part in things." That's when I knew, even this, being left on the side of the road like an unwanted package, was somehow going to be my fault. I said nothing for a beat too long, and she filled the silence the way she always had. "Do you want me to call her? I'll see if she can explain." "No," I said, voice low. "Don't bother." "Suit yourself," she muttered. And then the line went dead. I didn't cry. I'd already passed that checkpoint. I stood up, walked to the tiny bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared into the mirror. What did you expect? I thought. That blood means loyalty? I plugged the phone into the wall, hoping the outlet would work. A slow trickle of charging began. With just enough juice to send one message, I texted my father. Short. Desperate. Dad. Please help me. I don't know where to go. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I sat on the corner of the bed, gripping the phone like it could anchor me. Then the screen lit up. Don't make this public. Don't embarrass the family. Let your sister handle it. That was it. No, are you okay? No, where are you? Just a warning to stay quiet. As if the family name was more important than my dignity. As if I had embarrassed them by being left behind, not by calling for help. The irony was exhausting. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The charger cord fell out of the socket again, the old outlet too loose to hold it. I stuffed the phone in my jacket pocket and headed outside. It was still early, the light barely stretched across the pavement, and the sky had that pale bluish tint before the Arizona sun took over. I walked a few blocks, passing shuttered tourist shops and cafes just starting to open. I found a small coffee shop with hand-painted signs and the smell of something sweet baking inside. The bell over the door jingled softly as I stepped in. I ordered a plain tea, cheapest item on the board, with the last $2 I had. The cashier, a woman probably in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a tight ponytail, didn't say anything. Just handed me a mug like she'd done it 1,000 times for people like me. I took the tea and sat near the window. Outside, a family was laughing. A man lifted a toddler onto his shoulders while a woman took a photo. They looked like a postcard. I sipped my tea slowly, warming my hands around the cup. No one was coming. No one was looking. If I had passed out on this floor, if I'd never made it out of that motel room, would anyone in my family have noticed? Would they even care? It wasn't just Kalista who left me behind. She just did it literally. The others had been doing it for years, in smaller, quieter ways. This morning proved it. For the first time in a long while, I stopped making excuses for them. I stopped telling myself they didn't mean it, or they were doing their best. Because if this was their best, I didn't want it. The tea was getting cold. I didn't know what would come next. I had no money, no ride, no plan. But I had the truth. And sometimes, when everything else has been stripped from you, that's the only thing left that feels like yours. After I left the coffee shop, I walked aimlessly through the town, the cheap soles of my shoes scraping against the cracked sidewalks. There was no real destination, just a need to move, to get out of that chair before the numbness turned to panic. I passed tourist shops selling handmade jewelry and healing crystals, the kind of stores Kalista would have filmed herself walking into, posing with a faux curious smile as if the local culture fascinated her. It was past noon by the time I found the public library. A squat building with faded bricks and a green door that creaked when I opened it. Inside, it was cool and still, like time had paused. I asked the woman at the front desk if I could use a computer. She gave me a laminated guest login card and pointed me toward a row of dusty monitors at the back. I sat down, slid the headphones off the desk, and logged into an old email I hadn't used in years. The interface was clunky, unfamiliar, but it worked. I figured if I was going to start thinking clearly, I needed to see exactly how far this whole thing had gone. I typed Kalista's name into the Instagram search bar, not even thinking twice. And there she was, front and center. A group photo, her and the 3 women from the trip, all smiles, cocktails in hand, posing against the backdrop of the same red rocks we'd driven past. I recognized the restaurant patio. I recognized the dress I'd complimented Lissa on. The picture was posted the same evening I was left standing on that side street. I stared at the photo longer than I should have, not because I expected to be in it, but because I had been. I remembered that moment. I was in the original shot. I had asked a waiter to take it for us, but now I was gone, cropped, and the caption read, "Nothing like a girls' trip with real family." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I felt something rise in my chest. Not sadness, not even anger, just this burning clarity. They hadn't just left me behind. They'd deleted me, scrubbed me out of the story like a stain. I clicked through more photos. One after another, moments I'd lived through were carefully edited. Pictures that originally had 5 women now only showed 4. A table I'd sat at, now cropped. Conversations I'd been part of, reduced to captions I had no voice in. They didn't just leave me, they erased me. I opened my email tab again, fingers still trembling slightly, and saw a new message at the top of my inbox. It had come through just that morning, but from an unfamiliar name. When I opened it, my stomach flipped. It was from Kalista. Well, not directly. It was meant for someone else, probably one of her friends, but had accidentally forwarded to my old address. Maybe she hadn't realized I still had access. The subject line read, "Let her sweat." And the body? "She needs to learn her place. She always makes things awkward. This'll toughen her up." That was it. No apology. No regret. Just strategy. I read it again, then a third time. The words didn't change. If anything, they sharpened. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment. It was a plan. A calculated, cold-hearted attempt to teach me a lesson, like I was some wayward child in need of discipline. Learn her place. I sat back in the chair, my hands cold on the keyboard. For a moment, I just watched the blinking cursor in the corner of the screen, as if it had something more to say. I clicked print. The machine hummed quietly as it produced the email in black and white. I folded the page carefully and slipped it into the side pocket of my jacket, next to the $20 bill I hadn't spent. I didn't cry. There was no point. Instead, I walked out of the library and let the Arizona heat hit me full in the face. I found a small rental listing posted on a corkboard outside a laundromat, an older woman looking for someone to share a room in her guest house, just a few blocks from town. Cash only, no pets, respectful hours. I jotted down the number, walked back to the coffee shop, and asked to borrow the phone again. Her name was Evelyn. She sounded cautious but kind. Said she could meet me in 30 minutes. The guest house was modest. Wood-paneled walls, a twin bed, and a window unit that rattled but worked. She asked no questions beyond how long I planned to stay. I said I wasn't sure. "Long as you don't bring any drama into my house, I don't mind the company," she said, shrugging. I gave her the last of my cash, enough for 3 nights. It bought me space. And that night, that was all I needed. I unpacked what little I had and sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room. The only light came from a narrow lamp, flickering just enough to remind me this place wasn't mine. I opened the desk drawer and found a lined notebook. Unused, probably left by a previous tenant. I didn't think twice. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I began. Not a diary. I wasn't interested in journaling emotions. This was a record, a log. Kalista, Lissa, the drive, the brunch. The moment she handed me the tote bag and whispered, "Just play along." Every detail, every line of dialogue I could remember. I wrote it down. Not for revenge, for clarity. Because the next time someone told me I was being too sensitive, I wanted to have more than just a vague memory. I wanted facts. I wanted evidence of what it looks like when a family decides one of their own doesn't deserve to be seen. I filled 5 pages that night. My hand cramped. My back ached from sitting on that stiff wooden chair. But I didn't stop until the timeline was there. Black ink on cheap paper. The next morning, I'd figure out how to get more cash, maybe ask around for day labor or cafe work. I'd find a way to eat, to charge my phone, to move forward. But that night, I let the pages carry what my shoulders had been holding for far too long. Sleep never came. I lay there in that rented room, staring at the low ceiling as the hum of the old air conditioner buzzed on and off. My fingers itched for something to do, but I'd already written everything I could. The notebook was filled with jagged thoughts and memories that didn't feel like mine anymore. More like court records from a trial no one ever held. I finally sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and reached for the tote bag I'd thrown on the floor earlier. I meant to check the side pocket again, just to make sure I hadn't missed anything. A receipt, maybe. A forgotten $5 bill? Something. Instead, my hand brushed against fabric. Thin, soft, almost like tissue. I pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. It was a handkerchief, white cotton, delicate embroidery at the edges, and stitched in light blue thread in my grandmother's looping cursive were 4 simple words. "You are not invisible." I froze. I had forgotten all about this. She'd given it to me when I was 17, the night after Kalista gave a speech at some school award banquet, and I'd come home in tears because no one noticed I'd won something too. A smaller award, sure, but still mine. I remembered sitting in the kitchen while she made chamomile tea, her hands steady even though mine shook. "You shine quieter, that's all," she had said. "But the light's still there." I held the handkerchief to my chest now, letting that memory settle over me like a blanket. She'd passed 4 years ago. No funeral speech, no tribute, just another quiet exit, just like mine. The sun was up by the time I washed my face and stepped outside. The streets were busier than the day before. Tourists with cameras, couples holding iced lattes, the kind of bustle that made you feel even more alone. I walked toward the bookstore cafe I'd passed on my way in, a little corner building with ivy crawling up one side and a sandwich board out front that said, "Good books, strong coffee, soft landings." That last part pulled me in. Inside smelled like cedar shelves and cinnamon scones. A woman behind the counter looked up from a stack of receipts. Early 40s, auburn curls pinned back with 2 pencils. No name tag. I cleared my throat. "Hi, I'm looking for work. I can clean, stock shelves, whatever you need." She gave me a once-over, not judgmental, just evaluating. "You from here?" she asked. "No. Austin." Her eyes narrowed. "What's your name?" "Marin." She paused. "Marin? As in Kalista's sister?" I stiffened. "You know her?" The woman let out a short laugh. "Let's just say I've met her version of loyalty." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I stayed quiet. She nodded at the mop bucket in the corner. "You know how to use one of those?" "I've seen worse," she smiled. "Then grab it. Floor's yours." I spent the next hour mopping tile, restocking tea, wiping down bookshelves, and pretending not to notice the way she watched me. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, she slid a mug of coffee across the counter. "I'm Sabine," she said. I took the mug and nodded. "Thanks for the chance." She leaned back against the counter, arms folded. "So, you want to tell me what happened?" "Not really," I said, "but I probably will." She didn't push, just sipped her own coffee and said, "She left me behind too. Not in the middle of nowhere, but in front of an entire charity gala. Made me out to be unstable because I challenged her timeline on a campaign pitch. 1 second I was her business partner. Next thing I know, I'm blocked, iced out, and apparently overwhelmed by stress." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds familiar." Sabine shook her head. "She's always been charming to the right people. That's the trick. If you're not in the frame, they never see the bruise." It was the first time in days I felt seen without having to explain myself. "Anyway," she added, "you look like you need a place that remembers you." I took a sip of the coffee and let the warmth spread through me. The next few days followed a quiet rhythm. I swept floors, wiped tables, learned the inventory system, and tried not to think too far ahead. I slept at Evelyn's guest house, helped her carry groceries, and folded my clothes neatly even though no one would check. The quiet helped. So did Sabine's non-questions. One evening, as we were closing up, she locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed, then turned to me with that same measuring look. "You ever thought of telling your side of the story?" I hesitated, drying my hands on a towel. "Who would care?" Sabine leaned on the counter, chin resting on her hand. "They don't have to," she said. "You do." I stood there for a moment, the towel still in my hand. Something about the way she said it, the tone, the certainty, lodged itself into my chest. I'd been so busy defending myself in silence, I hadn't realized I'd given up my right to speak. That night, I didn't go straight home. I walked the long way around town, the evening air cooler than usual, my hands buried in my jacket pockets. I passed the town square, lit up with soft string lights, and thought about all the stories that never got told, not because they weren't worth hearing, but because the wrong people got to speak first. By the time I got back to my room, the notebook was already on the desk, waiting. By the time the sun came up again, my notebook had 4 new pages filled with names, dates, and the kind of details that come rushing back when you finally let yourself stop pretending it didn't matter. I wasn't writing for therapy. I was building a case, if only for myself. The next day at the cafe started like any other. I swept floors, wiped down the glass pastry case, restocked sugar packets. Sabine didn't hover. She let me find my own rhythm, which I appreciated. I liked that I didn't have to earn her attention or walk on eggshells to keep it. She just let me exist. That was rare. It was around 11 a.m. when she approached the back counter where I was stacking mugs. "There's someone here asking for you," she said, drying her hands on a cloth. I looked up. "Who?" She said her name's Lissa. Ring a bell? The name hit like static. I stepped out from behind the counter, and there she was, polished as ever. Camel-colored coat, gold earrings, sleek ponytail. She didn't belong in this place, not with her perfect makeup and that calculated smile. "Marin," she chirped like we were old friends catching up over mimosas. "Wow, this place is quaint." I crossed my arms. "What do you want?" She blinked, just once, and then composed herself. "Look, I wanted to come in person, be decent about this." I didn't say anything. I heard about the photos and the email, and I know Kalista probably went too far. We all did. Things got carried away. But you've made your point, right? I raised an eyebrow. Have I? She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. People are starting to notice. Her brand manager is panicking. We've had to pause some campaigns. You know how social media is. One little story and people jump to conclusions. I let her talk. "We're all really sorry, truly," she continued, voice syrupy. "But maybe it's time to ease up. Maybe take down the posts before this gets out of hand. You don't want to look petty. That wouldn't reflect well on you either." There it was. The real reason she came. Not guilt, not remorse, damage control. I studied her face. For a second, I imagined the conversation she must have had with Kalista that morning. "Let me handle it." "I'll be nice about it. You didn't come here to apologize," I said evenly. "You came to protect your image, hers, yours, the whole little group." Lissa's smile faltered. "That's not fair." Neither was leaving me on a street corner in a town I didn't know. She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "Save it. I'm not taking anything down, and if you or anyone else shows up here again, I'll make sure the next post includes your names, faces, and your little brunch toasts about real family." Lissa's cheeks colored slightly. "You don't need to be hostile." "No," I said, "but I need to be clear." She glanced toward the door, gave a tight nod, and walked out without another word. I stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle. Sabine didn't say anything, just handed me a glass of water and went back to slicing lemons. Later that afternoon, as we were cleaning up, Sabine looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You want to see something?" I nodded. She led me to the back office, where an old desktop sat humming beside a grainy black and white security monitor. "We've got footage from the day you got dropped off," she said. "It doesn't record everything, but I remembered seeing the SUV pull up that morning." She clicked a few keys. The screen jumped to an image of the street in front of the cafe. There we were, the 5 of us, stepping out of the car, Kalista handing me the tote bag, the group walking ahead, me trailing behind. Then the real footage played. The same SUV, Kalista at the wheel, Lissa in the passenger seat, 2 others in the back, all of them laughing. You could clearly see Kalista lean out the window, wave, and say something. Then the car sped off. On the edge of the frame, I stood there, arms half raised, confused and still. There was no way to spin it. No, it was just a joke. No, we didn't know she stayed behind. It was premeditated. It was cruel. And now, it was documented. Sabine looked at me. "You've got every right to tell the truth now." I didn't reply. I just nodded. That night, I went back to Evelyn's guest house and pulled out the notebook. I printed a still from the footage at the library, Kalista's smug face leaning out the window, mid-laugh, and taped it to the inside cover. Then I wrote on the opposite page, what they did. Below it, I began outlining the events, not just the trip, everything, the years of comments, the minimization, the erasure. I listed each incident like an exhibit in a trial, facts, names, details. It wasn't for revenge, it was for memory, for clarity, for the future version of me who might doubt what she remembered. I wasn't a ghost, I wasn't invisible, and I wasn't confused. They did it, and now I had proof. The cafe was quiet the next morning, the kind of quiet you notice more when your thoughts are too loud. Sabine had just flipped the sign to open, and I was in the back room, staring at my screen, the cursor blinking in rhythm with my pulse. The post sat there, ready, anonymous. No photos, no names, just the truth. I clicked publish before I could second guess it. The name of the blog was simple, Silent Sisters. By noon, it had 24 views. By dinner time, it had 100. Some clicked away after the first paragraph. Some left comments, short, raw. This happened to me too. My mother called me dramatic. I was 17 when my sister told me I ruined everything I touched. I didn't know what I expected, but I didn't expect to feel lighter. I thought about the letter I'd taped into my notebook, the printed, still shot from the cafe security footage, Kalista laughing as she sped off. It was still surreal that I needed proof just to believe my own pain had merit. Sabine walked in around 5 with a teacup in one hand and a notepad in the other. She set the cup down next to me and didn't say anything right away. She didn't have to. They didn't silence you, she said, her voice low, steady. They sharpened you. I didn't respond, just wrapped my hands around the cup and let the heat reach places in me that had gone cold. That night, I stayed late again, helping Sabine restock the back shelves. We worked in quiet rhythm, the occasional comment between us about inventory or the weather. When she left to lock up the front, I wandered back to my corner, refreshed the blog page, and saw another dozen comments had rolled in. One from a woman named Carla said, I told my family once what my brother did. They said I was ruining his life. I stopped talking. It's been 22 years. I reread that sentence 3 times. I didn't want to become Carla. 2 days later, I received a letter at Evelyn's house. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, handwritten, the kind with a slightly uneven fold and a return address I hadn't seen in a long time. It was from my father. Evelyn handed it to me during breakfast, said, It came while you were out. Looks like it's from someone important. I took the envelope and turned it over in my hands. I didn't open it right away. I finished my eggs. I washed the plate. I walked outside and sat on the porch swing, the letter tucked between my fingers like it might bite. Finally, I slid my thumb under the flap and unfolded it. Marin, I'm sorry for how things might have felt. I know you were hurt. I'm not saying it was right, but this is still family. Please don't make this public. Think of the damage. Think of your mother. Let Kalista handle this. She's always had a better grasp on what's best for everyone. We can talk when you come home. Love, Dad. I read it twice. The first time, as a daughter, a girl who used to braid his graying hair when he sat reading the Sunday paper, who once stayed up late just to hear his car pull in the driveway. The second time, as a woman, he wasn't sorry I was hurt. He was sorry I wasn't quiet about it. There was no invitation to understand, no effort to ask what happened, just fear of what people would think. I folded the letter neatly, walked back into my room, and slid it into the back of my notebook behind the photo. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because even weak words deserve to be remembered for what they reveal. The next morning, I returned to the cafe before opening hours. Sabine let me in without question. She'd already brewed the first pot of coffee, and I took my usual spot at the back, opened my laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor. This time, I didn't write anonymously. I titled the post simply, What Happened to Me? I included no accusations, just facts. I detailed the day I was invited to Sedona, the way Kalista had made promises about healing and reconnecting. I described the cafe, the brunch, the side street, the moment she rolled down her window and said, "Figure it out." I added the still from the video footage, not to shame, but to show that I remembered it exactly as it happened. And then, I wrote, "I was never angry they left me behind. I was angry they expected me to stay silent. I stayed quiet for 34 years. I'm not doing it anymore." Before I clicked publish, I sat back in the chair, let the weight of it settle. It wasn't about Kalista anymore. It wasn't about the photo, or the laughter, or even the car pulling away. It was about every time I swallowed a truth because someone told me it was not the right time, not that serious, or not worth upsetting people over. It was about deciding my voice mattered, even if no one else agreed. I hit publish, and then I closed the laptop. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel brave. I felt real, solid, like something inside of me had finally stopped floating and found a place to land. That afternoon, while wiping down tables between customers, Sabine gave me a nod. "You slept last night." I didn't deny it. "I did," she smiled. "You look like someone who's done waiting for permission." I paused. "I am." She turned back to the espresso machine. "Good, then let them hear you." By the time it went viral, I had nothing left to lose, only truth to gain. It started quietly, a few shares here, a handful of reposts there. At first, the traction came from women like me, those who'd been told to keep quiet, to protect the family name, to let it go for the sake of peace. But within 24 hours, the post took on a life of its own. By the end of the second day, it was on Reddit, Twitter, and Facebook parenting groups with tens of thousands of comments. Strangers dissected the footage from the cafe camera frame by frame. Side-by-sides were posted, me standing alone on the sidewalk, Kalista waving out the car window. No sound, but none was needed. The laughter was written across their faces. I watched from behind the counter of the cafe, wiping mugs that didn't need wiping, pretending not to notice the wave building. They connected the dots faster than I could have imagined. Someone pulled up archived posts from Kalista's blog. Others found photos of us from years ago and matched faces. A woman even found an old YouTube video Kalista had made at a speaking event about sisterhood and resilience. In the comments, someone had added, "Apparently she leaves her sisters on the street when they get too real." The hashtag started trending by that evening. Silent Sisters, #erased by blood. Not the good daughter. I hadn't tagged her in anything. I hadn't named names. But the internet did what it always does when the story is compelling, and the villain wears lip gloss and curated empathy. By the third day, Kalista's name was on the front page of a popular gossip blog. Family values influencer accused of emotional abuse by estranged sister. There was a screenshot from Silent Sisters, the part where I wrote, "I was never angry they left me behind. I was angry they expected me to stay silent." People started digging. A woman from a PR firm in Seattle posted about working with Kalista 3 years ago and how she'd been frozen out after asking too many questions about a campaign budget. Another woman from Phoenix said Kalista had told her she was too emotionally unstable to be part of a conference panel. The stories multiplied. They weren't all dramatic. Most were subtle. Comments, dismissals, that tone people use when they want you to feel small but can't say it outright. Kalista tried to respond with a carefully worded statement on her Instagram story. "I've always stood for sisterhood, healing, and growth." Sometimes people's perspectives don't align, and that's okay. I'm choosing to focus on love and light during this time. But people weren't buying it. Someone commented, "You left your sister behind like she was garbage, and now you're hiding behind quotes?" Another said, "This isn't perspectives not aligning. This is emotional cruelty." Within hours, her brand partners began backing away. First, the wellness tea company removed her photo from their homepage. Then the skincare line she promoted released a statement. "We are pausing our relationship with Kalista Langford while we review the current concerns raised by the community. We stand against all forms of bullying, including those within families." That same afternoon, her podcast producer announced they were parting ways. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, listening to the news unfold around me like distant thunder. Sabine was the one who looked me in the eye and said what I didn't want to admit. "She's not falling because you exposed her," she said. "She's falling because people recognized her." That night, as I locked up the cafe, I found a message waiting in my inbox from someone I didn't recognize. A woman named Denise. "I was in Kalista's wedding party," it read. "We haven't spoken in years. She told me I was too unrefined to be part of her post-wedding photos. That was the day I realized I was disposable to her." I replied only once. "You weren't disposable. She just didn't know how to value people she couldn't control." The next morning, Evelyn knocked on my door with the local newspaper in hand. "She's on page 3, she said, handing it over. There was a photo of Kalista in full makeup, stepping out of her car, expression grim, sunglasses pulled low. The caption underneath read, "Former brand influencer under fire after family abuse allegations go viral." I folded the paper and didn't read the rest. Later that afternoon, Sabine poured us each a cup of coffee and asked gently, "Do you want to write more?" I shook my head. "I've said enough." She didn't press, just nodded, as if that was the most powerful thing I could have said. "This wasn't about revenge," I added. "It was about boundaries, about truth." "You set them," she said, "and you held them." I smiled softly. "And I'm done carrying hers." She raised her cup. "To walking forward." I raised mine in return. I still had to work, still had bills, still had memories that showed up at night, uninvited. But something had shifted. Something deep. I no longer walked with my shoulders tucked in, as if I was apologizing for taking up space. Now I stood straighter. Not taller, just truer. And as her world burned, I quietly planted seeds in mine. The morning after the media storm quieted, I walked to the cafe just as the sun started casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The sky still had that lavender tint that comes right before it settles into a clear, cloudless blue. Sabine had already opened the place, the scent of fresh ground coffee and cinnamon bread curling around my senses like a welcome home. I hadn't touched my phone since the previous night. I'd seen enough. Kalista had gone silent. Her pages had been scrubbed, and her followers left to speculate. Every tag, every influencer collab had either distanced themselves or vanished outright. She was now a ghost on platforms that once glorified her curated life. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. That morning, as I sipped from a chipped mug behind the counter, Sabine handed me a small envelope. Her brow was furrowed slightly. "She said she didn't want to come inside," Sabine muttered. "Didn't want to make a scene." I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. It was from my mother. I stepped out back, away from the noise of steaming milk and turning pages. I sat on the steps, took a breath, and unfolded the letter. "Marin, I should have said something sooner." I watched it all unfold, first in disbelief, then with shame. I kept waiting for someone else to speak up, to fix it, to make it right. But no one did, especially not me. "You were never less than." I just didn't want to admit that maybe she wasn't more. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to look you in the eye one day and not see everything I ignored. Love, Mom. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I folded it, not neatly, not with ceremony, and slid it into my pocket. Later that day, I found her standing on the curb across the street from the cafe. She wore a cardigan I remembered from a Thanksgiving years ago, the one where she asked me to sit at the kids' table because we were short on space. She didn't wave, she didn't call out, just waited. I crossed the street, the Arizona heat already pushing up from the pavement. She opened her mouth, but I spoke first. I read the letter. She nodded. Her lips trembled just slightly. "I'm not here to relive it," I said. "Or to argue. I don't need an apology." She looked up, startled. "I needed a mother," I continued. "Back then." She closed her eyes. Her shoulders dropped. We didn't hug. There were no tears, just a silence that carried weight, not warmth, and that was enough. That evening, I sat at the front desk of my new space. A little converted storefront on the quieter side of town, nestled between a plant shop and a consignment boutique. I'd painted the walls myself, warm earth tones, subtle accents, no more sterile whites. The name above the front window read, RootRoot inside. There was a half-finished bookshelf on one wall, a round table with mismatched chairs, a corkboard with a few cards pinned up from women I'd met online, those who sent messages after reading my story. One woman from Nebraska wrote, "I left my family and thought I was the crazy one, until I read yours." Another from Maine simply wrote, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." On the largest wall, painted by a friend of Sabine's who volunteered her time and brushes, were the words, "Grow anyway." I read them every morning before unlocking the door. Root wasn't a business, not in the traditional sense. It was part design studio. I'd started taking small freelance projects again, and part gathering place. Some came for coffee, some came to work through grief, some just needed a place where they didn't have to explain why they no longer went home for Christmas. We didn't ask questions. That was the rule. You show up, you're welcome, that's it. One afternoon, as I was arranging some new plants on the windowsill, my email pinged. The subject line read, "Are you happy now?" It was from Kalista. The message was short. "I lost everything. Are you satisfied?" I read it once, then hit block. She'd confused accountability with cruelty. I whispered out loud, to no one in particular, "I'm not happy, I'm free." And that was the difference. That night, RootRoot hosted its first storytelling circle. I'd set out 10 chairs, not knowing if anyone would show, but by 6:45, every seat was full. A woman named Tamra shared a story about being left behind at an airport by her sister after a fight over nothing. A young mother named Jess talked about how her brother called her the weak link at their father's funeral. The room didn't buzz, it didn't weep, it listened. When someone finished speaking, we didn't rush to comfort them. We let the silence do the work. Sometimes the silence says what words can't. I didn't speak that night. I didn't need to. For once, I wasn't the one trying to fill the silence. I just sat in it. And in that quiet, I realized the most powerful goodbye isn't the one you shout across a parking lot or scribble on the back of a Hallmark card. It's the one you live with grace, the one that doesn't need to be explained or posted or approved. It's the one you carry in your spine, in the way you stop flinching at names, in the way you take up space without apology. The next morning, I opened the door to RootRoot, watered the plants, and made coffee. It was just another day. But this time, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I was simply doing it for me. The world didn't owe me closure. I made peace anyway. The last story circle of the month had just ended, and the chairs were still arranged in that imperfect circle I'd come to love. Some mismatched, a few creaky, but every one of them filled earlier by someone who had once believed her voice didn't matter. The air inside RootRoot lingered with the scent of lavender oil and the fading hum of shared silence. I was wiping down the counter when I felt a gentle tug at the hem of my cardigan. It was Eva. She was maybe 7, with a head full of thick brown curls and that look kids get when they want your full attention but aren't sure how to ask for it. Her mother, Rachel, had started coming to the center 2 weeks earlier, always quiet, eyes searching for the exits. She hadn't spoken much, but she came back, which said more than words ever could. Eva held out a folded piece of paper. "This is for you," she said, then darted back to her mother like she'd just handed off a live grenade. I smiled and unfolded it slowly. It was a drawing. Me, unmistakably me, standing in front of the RootRoot sign, wearing a cape. In bright red crayon across the bottom, it read, "To Miss Marin, thank you for saving my mom. You're the bravest woman I know." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The words clutched at something deep and untouched in me. I just nodded toward Eva, who peeked from behind her mom and gave a small, proud wave. Later that night, I placed the drawing in a frame and hung it beside the shadow box I'd made, the one with my grandmother's embroidered handkerchief, the one that had once told me, "You are not invisible." I'd believed it then. Now I knew it. The next morning, I arrived early at the center, before the sunlight had fully warmed the sidewalk. I brewed a pot of coffee, opened the windows to let in the soft desert breeze, and reached for a small leather-bound notebook tucked in the drawer under the front desk. It was my grandmother's, one I'd brought with me from Austin but hadn't opened since her funeral. I'd flipped through it once, in the days after she passed, but there was one page I never could bring myself to read. It had been marked with a faded ribbon and folded over like something not quite ready to be faced. Now, in this quiet place I'd made, I was ready. I unfolded the page slowly, careful not to tear the fragile crease. Her handwriting was as familiar as breath, even though the ink had started to fade. Marin, one day, you'll be the one who listens when no one else does, the one who stays when others run, not because you have to, but because it's who you are. That will scare some people. They'll try to quiet you, contain you, define you, but you were born to hold space, and space is never silent. I closed the notebook and pressed it to my chest. That afternoon, I removed the ribbon and left the page open on the windowsill in the sun. That night, a storm passed through Sedona, light rain and distant thunder, but the center felt untouched, as if some deeper weather had already moved through me. I didn't hear from Kalista again. Her social media was gone. No more live stories about balance and boundaries. The companies that once clamored for her endorsements were reportedly re-evaluating brand partnerships. A mutual friend mentioned in passing that she'd hired a crisis PR firm, but the damage had already spread. There were rumors, lawsuits, unpaid debts, contracts severed. She was no longer trending. She was no longer anyone's darling. She didn't reach out, and I didn't look for her. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even curious. I had simply moved on, and it wasn't a dramatic exit. No slammed doors, no proclamations. Just an ordinary Tuesday where I realized I hadn't thought about her all day, and when I did, there was no ache. There was just space. A few weeks later, while dusting the bookshelf at the front of the studio, I overheard one of the women telling another, "Marin, she's the one who started this place. You know, after her sister tried to bury her." I didn't correct her. I didn't shrink from it either. She wasn't wrong. Sometimes people try to bury you, and you grow anyway. The truth is, I never found home in any of the places people told me it should be. Not in family dinners with forced laughter, not in silent phone calls that ended with, "You're overreacting," and certainly not in the empty apology of, "But she's your sister." Home, it turned out, was the feeling of being known without having to explain yourself. It was the sound of women laughing over shared stories, even if their voices trembled. It was the way Eva's drawing sat proudly above the light switch and how no one ever asked me to take it down. Home wasn't a place. It was the absence of fear, of erasure, of pretending. And it had taken me 34 years, one betrayal, a camera recording, and a little handwritten handkerchief to find it. But I did. Now, when people walk into RootRoot, they don't see a woman trying to rebuild. They see someone who already has. And I don't need them to know what it cost me. Because I do. Sometimes, the deepest wounds aren't the ones we see, but the ones we carry from people who were supposed to protect us. This story wasn't just about being abandoned in a strange town. It was about what happens when someone finally says, "Enough." Have you ever been treated like you were easy to leave behind? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if you found something meaningful here, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come, more truth, more healing. More real family stories.